Welcome to the first of the ANZ Biochar Industry Group's Anthropic short webinar series for 2022. Today's webinar is entitled Get Paid to Use Bio Products, and these are, of course, the products produced when creating bioenergy, that is heat and gas or green hydrogen from gasification, pyrolysis and torrefaction type technologies mainly. This is the practice of heating or baking underutilised and sustainably sourced biomass residues from food and fibre production, as well as feedstocks such as biosolids from wastewater treatment, just to name one. These are currently considered as waste streams being landfilled or burnt, both major contributors to pollution. At Verbeek, we consider these to be resources that can be recovered and re-enter the new carbon economy for economic, environmental and social outcomes. With the supporting carbon sink accreditation via a life cycle assessment carried out by a third party, these technologies and associated product projects can be classified as climate positive. Biochar is the main carbon drawdown product produced, which is a high value commodity. It has been defined by experts and recognised by the IPCC as one of 6 carbon drawdowns with real permanence, and thus head us speedily towards net zero 2050 targets in a very real way. Today, we have an excellent lineup of presenters, starting with Thomas Schroder, Head of Climate Action at Southpole, who will elaborate on the new Verra methodology for biochar utilisation in soil and non-soil applications, of which Southpole was a major contributor. Melissa Rebbeck, Director of Climate Agriculture and Support, who has extensive experience as a farmer and researcher exploring biochar in regenerative agriculture practices, including feeding it to cows and using dung beetles to bury it. And finishing with Ignatius Verbeek, Director at CarbonX, a seasoned carbon farming expert specialising in soil carbon methodology, technology and software development. Each presenter will present for approximately 20 minutes, followed by a Q&A at the end. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel, which we will provide the link for afterwards. We would also like to thank Southpole for sponsoring today's webinar. I will hand you now over to Sam Sagami, our Cluster Manager, just to run through some audience engagement activities for the webinar.
Thanks, Don, and hi, everyone. If you could all just have a look on the bottom of your Zoom page there, you'll see a Q&A tab. So if you can just put all of your questions in the Q&A tab, and then at the end, we will, of course, make sure that we get all of your questions answered. As Don said, we want to make today a bit more engaging than our normal webinars. And so we've got a great new program that we're going to be trying out today to gain immediate questions and answers from you. So have a look at the chat tab there, and I'll be sending across some links for you to be able to answer some questions. And then we can see them live as they come in. And so the first questions that we will be putting through is right now. So if you all just want to click on the link that I've just put there in the chat. And then we will see these answers come in straight away. So, have you attended our webinars before, is our first question. It's a great halfway mix between the two right now. Wonderful to see so many new people coming to our webinars. So thanks for joining us today. Fabulous. And we'll go to the next question. So who do we have in the audience today? What category do you most align with? We have waste generators, biomass processing equipment providers, biochar technology providers, biochar processing, carbon crediting and trading. It's great to see the different types of people we have in the audience today. For everyone in the other category, what would be wonderful is if you can just put in the chat there what category you most align with, and this just enables us to find out where everyone's coming in from. So just feel free to put that in the chat, and that would be wonderful. Fantastic. Thanks everyone for taking part in our first two questions, and I will hand it back to you, Don.
Thanks, Sam. So I'm introducing our first presenter for today, Thomas Schroder, who's Head of Climate Action at Southpole, PhD from the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. Tom is passionate about looking after the planet and reducing human impacts on climate change. He has a love of the ocean, mountains, and outdoors. He has a professional track record of 20 years plus, spanning professional deployments across 3 continents, and his focus areas are climate finance, sustainability, and sales and marketing. So welcome, Tom, again, and I'll hand it over to you to share your slides.
Yes, thank you, Don, and thank you, Sam, for setting all this up, and also thanks to Rebbeck for allowing us this opportunity to be the first presenter here and also be associated with this webinar. I would like to first start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're respectively meeting on today. In my case, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. I will now share my screen with you. Bear with me. Sorry, that's the wrong one, is it? Okay, just give me one more second. I hope get the right one up soon, because I have a lot of content that I would like to share with you. Can you just please let me know, do you see the biochar opportunity with VCS in Australia?
Yes, we do, Tom.
Oh, okay, thank you. Because I can't really see it myself. Perfect. All right. So yes, as Don was saying, this is the world's first concrete opportunity. Sorry, no, of course, there's another one with Puro, but in terms of ICROA accredited and kind of recognized international voluntary carbon standards, the VCS biochar methodology for soil and non-soil applications is the first one that will allow biochar producers in the second order and biochar users in the first order really to claim carbon credits from the application of biochar in soil and non-soil cases. So I will start off by, well, I'm Thomas Schroder here, as Don has kindly introduced me. I've been with Southpole for about 8 years. I'm based in the Sydney office, and I oversee our climate projects team, which is responsible for working with landowners and producers across different carbon and biodiversity project methodologies. Southpole itself is in its 16th year of operation. We're a certified B Corp, so climate change is enshrined in our constitution. It's not just about profit maximization. We're one of the first players really globally in the carbon space. We are a true end-to-end company covering the whole value cycle from pre-feasibility assessment, project registrations, credit issuance, trading, and transactions with some of the world's most recognizable companies, mainly in the voluntary space, although we're also active in the compliance space. We have a whole range of advisory services that complement what we do, and we place emphasis on thorough relationship building and meaningful stakeholder engagement with our project partners. We believe in equitable outcomes for them, as well as for the environment, and for us, of course, as their partner. We are the world's largest project developer, with counting over 700 projects in 70 countries across the world. This covers a whole range of nature-based solutions as well as industry methods. There's a strong focus here in the Asia-Pacific region and also Latin America, although increasingly, and biochar is a prime example for that, we see more and more countries, more and more projects also in North America and Europe. So we have an unparalleled expertise in technical support, and have so far accompanied the development of over 20 different methodologies across VCS, GS, GCC. We sit on various working groups, of course, also with the ERF. And like I said before, we can maximize project revenues for the project partners through our direct market access to the buyers of your credits. Our market share in international voluntary carbon trading is actually 22% in 2021. So this is slightly outdated here. I beg your pardon. Don has given a great overview of what biochar is already, so I don't have to start with the bare basics here, of course. Plus, you're all members or interested parties in ANSBIC, so we can skip that a little bit. But what I would like to place an emphasis on is Southpole's role as a market leader in the technical removal space. We're co-founders and are currently holders of the Secretariat of the CCS Plus initiative, which is where we develop another methodology for carbon capture, utilization and storage, also with Verra. And last year we have launched a next-gen carbon dioxide removal facility with Mitsubishi that is looking to mobilize anywhere between $300 to $800 million of private sector funds for carbon capture and storage. In terms of biochar, we're already trading because we have market demand through our sales team. We're trading carbon future and Puro credits. We are proud members of ANSBIC since last year. Yeah, we're not only authors of the methodology that I'm about to dive in a bit deeper, but we're also a member of the American Climate Action Reserve Biochar Working Group. And yeah, we're looking to place great emphasis on biochar credits as part of this next generation removal and purchase facility that we're setting up. So a little bit of market intel on how biochar carbon credits are tracking at the moment. The general conversion that we're assuming is that 1 ton of biochar represents about 3.6 tons of CO2 equivalent. So that would be 3.66 carbon credits generated with a ton of biochar. It really depends on the quality and the organic content of the underlying feedstock. There's also a default decay rate that needs to apply then depending on the underlying feedstock. But yeah, high level then, if you break all that down, the rule of thumb is that you get about, let's say 2 roughly carbon credits per ton of biochar. What do these biochar credits trade at the moment? Demand is still relatively slow and a little bit anecdotal, but yeah, we see prices of around $90 to $170 a ton. This, of course, is based on high technology and high temperature pyrolysis without leakage emissions. So other types of caveats would need to be made when you consider these factors in terms of the conversion of the actual biochar into carbon credits. So let's talk a little bit about the methodology and the key eligibility criteria. And also, of course, we're here because we're interested in working with you to develop the carbon assets, the carbon potential of your biochar project. So please feel free to reach out to Don or to myself, ideally also after this webinar, to get in touch with us. We've already been talking to some of the members of what we can do for them. Roughly now, speaking about biochar production, there's three phases really that are considered in terms of determining the amount of carbon generated with the methodology. One has to do with the sourcing of the biomass. Yeah, there are certain criteria that I will explain a little bit later in terms of the quality of the underlying feedstock. Then it's about the production, high-tech versus low-tech. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the application and utilization, where and how is the biochar stored in the long term, and how is that permanence guaranteed? So what's the process here really, and what are the roles? The example given here is for soils. The biochar producer converts eligible biomass into biochar. The retailer then will apply this and sell it to the farmer, potentially in a soil mix, and the farmer then will apply it. So the farmer is the initial owner of the carbon rights. If you think about non-soil applications, you would have the biochar producer, you would have the seller of the biochar, and you would have, let's say, a road construction company or other types of, let's say, construction or building material users that would then have the rights to these carbon credits. There are ways around that and of changing that. We have experience with that, working with the producers directly, and also making sure that the carbon rights can be assigned back to them. So if you don't have a buyer for your credits, don't worry yet. We can look at that together.
10 minutes, Tom.
Yes. Okay. So I'll speed up a little bit. The criteria for biochar projects. This is how we try to, because we get a lot of interest, really, how we try to prioritize who we work with. Ideally, working with operational projects already. Otherwise, projects that are already financially closed or under development. There we assign high priority, and then projects that don't have financial closure yet, we look at as well. We also have the facility to co-invest and invest in these projects directly. We have recently closed another funding round with Temasek, the Singaporean Sovereign Wealth Fund, and Salesforce. So by all means, that's something that we can talk to you about as well. In terms of what criteria do apply for sourcing biomass, first of all, biomass needs to be can only be considered if it would have been left for decay or would have been converted. So it's something that didn't already have a prior use. Australia, it's not really that critical, but biomass cannot be transported across country borders. Compliance with sustainability criteria, for example, under different regulations, it needs to be given. It's not purpose grown, so it's not just produced for making biochar. And we can only look at batches of single feedstocks. So biochar needs to be produced from the examples given on the right, and only those. You cannot mix and match, otherwise the eligibility criteria is not met. We're looking at high-tech pyrolysis. So we need to know under the methodology, what's the production temperature, how much we need to ensure that at least 70% of the waste energy can be reused or reintroduced into the cycle. Produced pyrolytic gases are recovered, and pollution controls exist. Then we talk about application. Biochar, for soil and non-soil, needs to be applied in terms of a long-term storage scenario that needs to be demonstrated. And there are, of course, numerous benefits in both cases that I'm not going to go into more now. But in either case, the application needs to be traceable through purchase proofing or digital solutions. What are the criteria for the end use of biochar? If you sell the biochar to somebody who will apply it, it needs to be utilized within 1 year of its production. In the case of a soil amendment, it needs to comply with the biochar material standards as established. We need to consider then the default decay rate of biochar as opposed to a measured one. And projects they need to track and specify where the biochar was applied. In the non-soil case, again, we need to establish here what the decay rate is, and this can be done by demonstrating in that specific case. If that cannot be done, then again, the default rate applies. If we can prove the stability of the use of the biochar, then you can get an extra 10% of carbon credits. In terms of relevant monitoring parameters, monitoring cycles can be established on an annual or biannual basis. That has to do with your cash flow needs and also, yeah, with I guess with your financing situation. Again, we can talk about that together. Some examples of what data is required from biochar producers is given on the right. We're looking at different documentations around input materials, energy uses, previous emissions checks, and then some of the criteria that I mentioned before around certification, total amount of biochar, of course, produced, lost, the carbon content, the machinery that's being used, what are the characteristics there. Anything that's economically sensitive will be important to be looked at as well. And then coordinates also in terms of where the biochar is actually applied. So I'm wrapping up. This is my last slide. If you want to know more about this, like I said, get in touch with me to talk about finance and also to look at your specific situation. We have set up a questionnaire that will allow you and us to quickly determine whether your project or the type of biochar that you produce and potential applications are eligible under the VCS, and also what the carbon potential would be. If your project meets these criteria, we will get in touch with you to discuss further. And anything that, if you think that you're close to qualifying but might not be fully there, also get in touch with us and we'll talk further. Again, this is a moving field. The methodology is in its final stages now. It's not fully published yet, but we're much further than when I last presented to Ansbik in October, November, I think it was. So both our criteria are evolving, as well as the methodology is currently being finalized and fixed up in terms of further eligibility constraints. Again, here are my contact details. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll hand it back to you, Don. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Thomas. Thomas, it might also be good just to put your best contact details there in the chat as well, just so people can copy it straight away. Yeah, thank you. Very interesting presentation, and yes, this Verra methodology for both the soil and non-soil applications we see as being a game changer because it's of course part of the voluntary carbon market, which is transcending international boundaries. And that leads to our next speaker, and I have to say, Thomas, thank you for showing us an example of what the paddock looks like when you haven't got dung beetles and those big lumps of grass that actually are repugnant to the cow. And so if you've got dung beetles, they will of course bury all that in the soil. And if your dung is biochar laden, even better. So up next is Melissa Rebbeck, and Melissa is the Director of Climate Agriculture and Support. She's also a counsellor and farm manager and a consultant. She has 25 years of leadership and vision in the space of climate risk change and drought management to state, local and federal government, peak bodies, industry stakeholders and primary production. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me on board.
Hand it over for you to run through your slides.
Okay, great. Bear with me, I would just share now. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. Thank you for having me on board. As Don said, I run a company called Climate and Agricultural Support, which I've been running since 2014 and have been since then really doing more projects with biochar and farming, and recently looking at scaling up the industry and working on large scale biochar production. I've worked in climate science for 25 years, applied climate science, but the work I've done through my own company since 2014 has been the most exciting work, because it really is that circular economic opportunities for agriculture and the other benefits and uses of biochar. We've covered off on what biochar is. I've got a lot to cover over, so I might skip over. I mean, we know it's a charcoal substance made from pyrolysis. It's the cation and anion exchange capacity that makes it special. It contains up to 90% carbon and has been identified by the International Panel on Climate Change as a key negative emission technology. Don covered that. Biochar production is by pyrolysis, and there's a whole range of different methodologies of doing that, from small backyard kilns, if you like, to large scale production. And this is a little diagram of what it could look like. You've got drying, grinding, the pyrolysis reactor where the material goes into. That creates gas that can then be used and captured to actually power the reactor. So that's just a little bit of a diagram on how that works. There's many ways of producing biochar, from stoves to continuous fixed kilns. Obviously, the larger scale the production is, the better the variable input costs and the better, the more benefits, I guess, you get, and the more return on investment, just to cover off on that. And look, these slides, I do believe, are being shared by over the internet, and you'll be able to access that later. But there's, this table in particular is quite useful, because there's different amounts of input and output, and there's continuous kilns, there's fixed kilns. They all make a difference in terms of how biochar is produced and its economic viability. Biochar can be produced from any carbon-based feedstock, including biomass from farms, food and waste. But in Australia alone, there's 50 to 100 million metric tonnes estimated that go into landfill, which are burned or go into landfill, and theoretically could produce 10 to 30 million metric tonnes of biochar in Australia. And that's what Ansbig is developing a roadmap to actually look at, and starting to process that biomass. And it has an economic value of $7.5 to $15 billion in Australia alone. There's a project that I'm working on in Kangaroo Island, and on Kangaroo Island alone, it has 6 million tonnes of timber that have been partially burnt in fires. So there's, and it's a waste, if you like, that could produce 1.5 million tonnes of biochar. So that's an example of a large-scale project that is attracting lots of attention. I just need to quickly cover off on the carbon cycle, because this is how biochar is very important. With the carbon cycle, we have root respiration, we have plant respiration that produces carbon, we have animal respiration that produces methane, and manure that produces methane and nitrous oxide. And of course, we've got fossil fuels that release carbon dioxide. And then the only way to draw that back down is by photosynthesis, using vegetation. But the other thing that is not in this cycle is that emission avoidance. So by not burning those millions of metric tonnes of biomass, and turning it into biochar, it traps it in our atmosphere. And that is why Tom had talked about the carbon credits associated with that, because it's the emission avoidance credits by trapping that carbon in the atmosphere and utilising that. But then there's also additional emission reduction fund carbon credits in Australia that you can get by applying biochar to the soil. To simplify it all, okay, so building carbon in the soil can happen by photosynthesis, but you can apply biochar to increase your carbon. For every 1% increase in your soil carbon in the soil, that gives you an increase of 30% in agricultural production on average. Up to 30%, so 10 to 30% increase in agricultural production by 1% increase in soil carbon. And the things to consider in Australia alone is that our top 10 centimetres of soil sustains most life on Earth. It's supposed to be alive with microbial activity, but we're killing it with ag chemicals and deforestation. Australia is using 1.5 to 1.6 times the resources it can recreate in 1 year. Australia is the third largest deforester in the world. And I work in the space along the Murray-Darling Basin as well, and our water, we've allowed the doubling of number of hectares along the Murray-Darling Basin, and we have less water available. But if we can increase the water infiltration in the soil, we can, reduce the reliance on water in our waterways. And again, for every 1% we increase our soil carbon, we also increase our soil water holding capacity by 10 to 30%. And that has that direct relevance to production of an increase of 10 to 30%. It's estimated that at least 50% of the carbon in the Earth's soils has been released into the atmosphere over the past centuries. So the way to put that back in is via biochar. Because we grow things from our soils, that biomass is then being used to produce certain things that is often, we then deem it as waste and we burn it. And that very attitude is what we are aiming to change, and there's carbon credits associated with that. So that is how you can monetize it. But then also by using that biochar in soils and in agriculture, which I'm now going to touch on. Regenerative agriculture, biochar is very much spoken about in that context. So regenerative agriculture has four main principles: maintaining year-round living ground cover, providing support for the microbial bridge of soil, of the microbes in the soil, which we are now just getting our heads around, what is that and what's needed. Biochar can help with that. Promoting plant and microbial biodiversity. Biochar also helps with that. And biodiverse animal grazing and high grazing pressure. Biochar helps increase the biodiversity of the microbes, but also that biodiverse animal grazing and the diversity of the animal nutrients, also the biochar will enhance those minerals and nutrients in the soil and make the minerals and nutrients more available to the plant. So it achieves points 1.4 above, but it also improves production and profitability. It builds soil carbon and soil health. It increases soil moisture holding capacity and reduces runoff. It adapts to and mitigates climate change, and it reduces methane output and enteric fermentation. From an estimated 108 million acres of current adoption from regenerative agriculture, they're talking about increasing it in Australia, across the world by 1 billion acres by 2050. The rapid adoption is based in part on the historic growth rate of organic agriculture, as well as the projected conversion of conservation agriculture to regen ag over time. This increase could result in a total reduction of 23.2 gigatons of carbon dioxide from both sequestration and reduced emissions or emission avoidance. Regenerative agriculture could provide a 1.9 trillion financial return by 2050 on an investment of $57 billion. This is what I advocate, in my role as an elected member to politicians and the like. Biochar is recognised as a drawdown methodology, being up to 90% carbon. Each tonne put back into the earth equals carbon drawdown. Let's go to the agricultural side. So biochar case studies. There's a range of case studies that have been put on a paper by Rob and Joseph in the, if you can find this on the AD's big website. So from avocados to cucumbers. But the thing in this is showing the average payback per tonne of biochar. So, you know, feedlot cattle, average of $5,000 per tonne of biochar. But when you get into horticulture, it's an estimated increase of $20,000 for every tonne of biochar used. So the payback in agriculture is huge. And that is not even considering the soil carbon payback you can get through the emission reduction fund. So I just want to touch on how I've used biochar in cattle feed in some trials. I use it, we applied it at, we use 150 grams per head per day for a year in dairy. And we found an increase in milk yields. Here's the milk yields along the side. These are the, we started, the year that it was fed was in 2019. And this is, you can see this kind of exponential increase in the milk yield in 2019. We stopped feeding biochar then and the milk yield dropped off. This is the 2-year-old animals. So if you go back when biochar wasn't being fed, that, you know, we were getting around 14, 15 litres per head per day. And by the time we stopped feeding, we're up to around 20 litres per head per day. This is the 2-year-old animals. There was a greater increase in the 2-year-old animals, and we think that that is because the younger animals are still having development in their rumen and their rumen functionality. And there's certainly papers to show that there's a redox active process in the rumen that allows a better conversion of better feed conversion, but also better uptake and absorption of minerals and nutrients. But also the biochar in the rumen will also absorb any chemicals or toxins or and the like. Just to summarise that trial, 150 grams per head per day, 250 cows over a year. Cost of the biochar over 12 months was $8,100. But we actually received back an average of around about 0.4 litres per head per day. But we actually found that was the average increase. So there was higher increases in the younger animals. And there was definitely a reduction in the fodder fed. And I've since fed biochar in other trials around Australia, and everyone reports about the reduction in the amount of fodder fed, as much as 3 round bales less per week per herd that size. And so the farmer saved, well, there was an increase in profit of $35,000 just by feeding that 150 grams per head per day, which is very easy. He just mixed it in with his mix that goes straight into the dairy. And as I said, the biochar is described as having this feed conversion redox active process in the rumen. So if we're looking at the net benefit for this particular trial, it was at least $2,700 per tonne of biochar used. So it's really important to go back to that. And so each tonne of biochar in this particular case was $800, but as the quantity of biochar and the efficiency of biochar production increases, people can provide that biochar, those resellers can provide that biochar at a lesser cost. So just a summary of some of the, I just really want to skip on because I've got to cover off on the soil and I'm going to run out of time. So some of those benefits: increasing weight gain, improved feed conversion, higher conception rates, increased milk solids as well, and a substantial increase in profits. But that's not all, because the thing is with feeding biochar through animals is that it's retained in the manure. And so I've done trials where we've applied biochar in compost, but also once that biochar passes through the rumen, majority of it is maintained in the manure. And so there's a really rapid way of spreading biochar across properties if in doing that. So let's talk about that. 50 cows do 1 tonne of dung a day. 250 cows do 5 tonnes of dung in a day, and 1,825 tonnes of dung in a year. So over 200 hectares, that's a spread rate of 9.1 tonnes per hectare of activated manure, we measured the manure properties and found higher concentrations of all minerals, nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon in the manure. So we started a trial looking at how dung beetles, if they were to bury this activated carbon or this manure, what does that do to the soil? So number one, it increased the microbes in the soil. This is mycorrhizae fungi. This is something that we talk about a lot as soil scientists, and mycorrhizae fungi can go 2, 3, 4 meters further into the soil than what plant roots do, and they can access water and access minerals and nutrients. There's a little filaments feed the minerals and take the minerals and nutrients from the soil and feed it to the plant and attach themselves to the plant root. Very, very important. Everywhere we've had biochar trials, we always find this increase in mycorrhizae fungi. So what we did was, when we applied this trial, we put biochar in dung and biochar under dung, and we had just dung only. And there was a prevalent populations of dung beetles to bury the biochar. So basically, this shows you that there's significant differences in the amount of mycorrhizae fungi where there's biochar in dung and biochar under dung. There was also
probably a few minutes.
Okay, all right. So there's also an increase in phosphorus in the soil. So there's lots of trials and lots of research to show this happens. We certainly found an increase in phosphorus where there was biochar in the soil. The exciting thing is the increase in organic carbon. So we found up to 4 tonnes per hectare increase in organic carbon. We converted the percent carbon to tonnes of carbon. Under the emission reduction fund, 4 tonnes per hectare of carbon sequestered per year times 3.67 to get the carbon Australian carbon credit units times $50 a tonne, which is the current spot price for carbon credits. That's $734 per hectare per year. So, okay, so let's have a think back now. We've talked about the increase of productivity we've got from the animal. We're now getting an increase in soil health, increase in soil carbon. We know for every 1 tonne of carbon increase in our soil, we get a 10 to 30% increase in production. We've got 4 tonnes per hectare increase. And we know, and now you can also get this $734 per hectare payback from the emission reduction fund on top of everything else. I did just to show you another trial recently done with Jeffries, biochar and compost just spread across the property. This trial as well shows you changes in soil carbon. So for example, we had nothing here. There was around about 17 tonnes per hectare of carbon. We got up to 30 tonnes per hectare of carbon. It was an increase of 2,000. If we were to put that through the emission reduction fund under the current prices, $2,385 payback per hectare. Again, remember, every percent increase on top of that in soil carbon, you get this automatic payback from your increase in productivity and increase in soil water holding capacity. Certainly found increase in soil water holding capacity as well with Jeffries, and increase in phosphorus. The research published papers all say there's 14,000 published papers on soil work. Joseph et al., biochar advocate through ANSBIG, published a meta-analysis and summarising these papers all show this increase in phosphorus, increase in soil minerals, soil nutrients, soil health. So it's definitely a benefit. But what I'm saying is you get this benefit, but also through the emission reduction fund, you can get paid back now, and that's where people like Tom from Southpole can help. And then there's also the increase in pasture biomass. So that same trial showed an increase in pasture biomass. So this is an example where the biomass was greater than compared with nothing. So increase in pasture biomass. Just wanted to touch on this trial. We've also applied biochar with inorganic fertilizers. To show you what happens is that the biochar and inorganic fertilizers can be mixed together. The inorganic fertilizers end up being strongly attracted to the biochar. The biochar becomes coated with the fertilizer. You can no longer see. The biochar the biochar, you can no longer see the biochar, it's absorbed by the fertilizer, and you apply it. And everywhere we've applied this, we found increase in yields, but the long-lasting in effect, because the nitrogen fertilizer does not denitrify or leach while that biochar is in the soil. And so history shows us that only 40% of nitrogen fertilizer is taken up by plants. Now we're getting a much greater uptake, and there's a worldwide shortage of nitrogen fertilizers at the moment, ammonium.
To wrap it up in about a minute.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll wrap it up. Increase. So just to the end. Wide benefits of agriculture and biochar in agriculture. There's other uses. We can use biochar in roads as well. And we know by removing 10 to 30 million tonnes of carbon dioxide, we can mitigate several % of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions. And I think this is a one take home I wanted you to have. For every 1% increase in soil carbon, it was 10 to 30 tonnes extra of water held in the soil, and 10 to 30% increase in production. So thank you. I showed a lot, and yeah, thanks for having me on board.
Melissa. Perhaps what you can do, Melissa, is just cut and paste that takeaway on that last slide and whack that in the chat room. And also perhaps your email as well, your best contact. That's great. Obviously, you've done a lot of work in this area, and as an industry as a whole, we have a lot to thank you for. And any questions for Melissa? Please put those in the Q&A, and we'll come to her and Thomas at the end. And I'm going to hand it over to Sam now, who has another couple of polling questions for you.
Thank you, Don, and thank you for everyone who first came in and posted answers to these questions when I first put it up earlier. If you haven't cast your vote, please go ahead and do so now. I'm going to give you 15 seconds just to cast your vote on what topic you are most interested in exploring and hearing about today. Gosh, 15 seconds goes really quickly. And we'll head over to the next one. So it looks like it's a draw, almost. Nearly. So we'll go to the next question. What level of readiness are you or your clients ready to register a soil or non-soil carbon project? 0 the least and 5 being the most. One and 3. There we go. Fantastic. Thanks everyone for partaking in that one.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Sam. So next up, our speaker is Ignatius Verbeek, and Ignatius is a seasoned carbon farming expert specialising in soil carbon methodology, technology, and software development. With over 15 years' experience in the field, he has worked on various projects such as developing advanced soil carbon measurement systems, developing and submitting methodology under the Carbon Farming Initiative, and undertaking soil carbon field trials. Ignatius had a significant personal event, and I caught up with him yesterday just to ask him some questions about this topic. So, Sam, if you could play that, put up that interview now, that would be great. So, Ignatius, first question up. What are the current options for biochar in the Emissions Reduction Fund, or the ERF?
That is a really quick answer to that. There are no. There's no methodology that directly allows you to claim a credit for biochar. Fighting tooth and nail, we have managed to allow it to be biochar to be used in soil carbon projects, but that was a hard fought battle. Annette Cowie worked on a biochar methodology a number of years ago, but it's been nascent. It hasn't sort of gone forward, and I think there's been quite a bit of water under the bridge since then. So that's where we're up to. Okay.
And but it is accepted as a soil ameliorant, isn't it? Like you can add it.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Reluctantly.
Yeah. Okay. Right. But the initial carbon content is taken off, but the accumulation of carbon, soil carbon after it's applied.
Yeah. I think that's an important point. If you were a producer of biochar, you would be claiming the credits for the carbon elsewhere.
Yeah.
And if you're using biochar in a soil carbon project, you've got to accept that any carbon from that biochar is netted out, and it's netted out in a conservative way. If you don't know what the carbon content is, it basically assumes it's 100%. Okay. So for some of the biochars that have fairly high ash content or mineral content, you want to make sure you know what that number is. Otherwise, you'll be, paying 100%. The that will be taken as carbon and discounted from any improvements in your soil carbon stocks.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because we do know that biochar will supercharge soil carbon projects. Biochar accumulates, in the pores and is further protected in the biochar as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, you'd expect that it has a very positive impact on the soil carbon stocks, and that's so it's from a soil carbon accounting point of view, you're looking at biochar as a catalyst, not as a carbon source.
Yes.
Some of the more recent applications approach are more in the terms of maybe hundreds of kilograms per hectare, as opposed to the paradigm in the past, or at least how the regulator saw it, as being tons of biochar per hectare, which is probably not economic, except in strange circumstances. Okay.
And do you expect, what are the chances of that changing in the future with the ERF?
The Emissions Reduction Fund is far more agile and open to change and improvements, and does so a lot quicker than it has in the past. Now, if they follow that trajectory, then the opportunities will open up. Whereas once, it was probably closed door and you couldn't see any change, then, that's how it is. So, we got the soil carbon methodology in 2014. We finally got it updated in 2018, and now we've got it updated again in 2021. So you can see the gaps between that. Maybe it gets changed again in a shorter time frame. The whole carbon markets Australian policy framework is very, very dynamic. So
anything could happen.
Anything could happen, and and in a sense, lobbying, presentations from industry and from producers can make that happen. You can accelerate it.
Yes. Okay. And how does biochar work when it comes to the soil carbon?
Probably beyond my pay grade, or my I wouldn't claim specific expertise in there, but it has a whole range of different benefits in terms of promoting the biology, basically. Supporting it, but in terms of how it's introducing it, putting it through animals first, mixing it with dung and things like that, has a whole range of things. It provides a habitat for bacteria, basically. That's has a positive influence over it all. So it is reiterates not so much the carbon content, but the impact it has on soil biology, soil structure, water holding capacity, and the like. That really leads
negative priming. Some of those chemical processes, things like that.
All of those things are a positive influence. And I mean, I think the results, there's not so much of it out there, but certainly all the preliminaries are pointing in the right direction, that this is one of the ways that you can supercharge soil health and soil carbon.
Great. So what are the best ways to make money from biochar, your understanding and experience?
So certainly it's a high value product, so it has a reasonable commercial return all by itself. But in terms of the carbon market, traded on the international markets that are opening, and there's more and more of those opening up all the time. Biochars, in many respects, is the perfect carbon credit. It comes with permanence sort of embedded in the product. Provided the sources and the applications are managed properly, it's a really high value credit that doesn't come with all the risks and options issues that say soil carbon does. So some of the prices for that at the moment are running well over €100. So if you can make it and get it onto the international market, that's your best option for thing. And then that's just selling the credit. It's still a valuable product. Like some people sort of want to sell the carbon units, then get paid for the carbon that goes in the soil. You can't double count that. You only get it once. You can sell it as a soil emollient, but you can't sell the credits twice. You only get to do that once.
Okay. So it's got its own value from an economic point of view.
Absolutely.
Which Melissa's spoken on today. So what are the challenges with the current supply problem that our industry has?
Well, the world needs billions of tons of credits, and biochar potentially is one of the mechanisms that could do that. You would know from your own members that we're nowhere near that on a global stage, and the technologies that are out there at the moment haven't scaled particularly well. And there's issues with supply of raw materials and the like. So it's just small. That's the problem. It's be lucky if it hit millions of tons, and we need 3 orders of magnitude more than that. So the challenge is there for the biochar industry to scale up. There's like an infinite demand for it in terms of you couldn't make enough of this stuff.
At the moment. Okay.
Get bigger faster is I could say.
that's what our aim is at Verbeek, so to help grow the industry. So that's our main KPI. But look, so in your opinion, does biochar have a place in the global carbon marketplace?
Oh, absolutely. I said it's like anything any credit that you could produce at the moment would be snapped up. I mean, Verra shifting its rules, which I'm not, Verra and Pura are both shifting their rules, something I'm not particularly comfortable with, because in trying to increase supply, they're decreasing standards. And I'm not saying that the standards that are there at the moment aren't subject to improvement and change and the like, and can be improved, but carbon credits rely on integrity. And if you start undermining integrity to improve supply, that ultimately will fail. So the pathway is improving high integrity supply, not changing the standards to make it easier for people to do things. So I think that's really important. That's the case.
Okay. And we have different types of technology that are producing different types of biochar. So and also sustainable the standards of sourcing of biomass.
I think so. There's a project I'm involved in at the moment, which I probably can't disclose, but they were looking for options for marketing the biochar they're producing. But when I had a look at the elemental analysis, it actually was a really good source of iron, not carbon. The carbon was a relatively small component of it. So I think there's some paradigms that people have about what is a biochar and the carbon and the other content, because those other mineral contents can be fundamental to its success and its application in different uses.
Phosphorus and things like that. for sure. Okay, and so finally, what are the new challenges with scaling of biochar this decade? So, for example, our standards, guidelines, and a roadmap to get there, vitally important in your opinion.
Listen, the work that Ansbig is doing, and in particular, the stuff that Craig
Bagnall,
Craig is doing is like fundamental. It's like laying the foundations for the industry to scale. And if you don't get those things right, what you'll do is you'll start running into problems with not meeting standards, losing integrity, and the like. I think the biggest challenge for biochar, I mean, where it works is where you're taking biomass, which has pulled carbon out of the atmosphere, and you're locking it into a stable form of carbon, and you repeat. I mean, that's carbon pump. That's where it's a real value. But as that product becomes valuable, you're putting a price on biomass. And then that can have really profound and negative impacts on land use, clearing, diversion of waste away from different things. It can be done in a really positive way because you're putting a value on biomass. You perhaps provide the economic foundations to manage, for example, invasive native species or regrowth, different things like that. You could manage that in a far more productive way. It's like landscape engineering. You could also just clear fell a whole lot of forest and just create a huge backlash that's not going to be good for the industry. So, I mean, that's the bit that I think the industry as a whole needs to get right. It needs to chart a way forward where this is seen as a net positive for everybody, and that those challenges about, exploiting biomass in the wrong way are really managed. So even though, like you focus on the technology for producing biochars, where your feedstock comes is an integral part of that. So you've got to get that right. You've got to push downstream. Same applies with how it's applied, how it's used. I mean, if it's turned into briquette fuel, that's not really helping anybody. But if it's turned into something that is basically locked out of the atmosphere permanently or for a very long time, that's the positive. So you've got to control both ends of that well. And probably I would say the biggest risk is, like putting a price on biomass. You will shift agricultural agricultural practices significantly if there's a price to be had for, I don't know, using up stubble or clearing land or all sorts of things like that. And that's a real risk.
Okay. Yep. All right. Yeah. So it's getting that balance right, isn't it? With the, because energy is the big demand these days, bioenergy, and it's trying to find the balance of, the bio products that are produced when you're creating that bioenergy. And as we know, hydrogen is the flavour of the month as well. And so you're looking at probably more like gasification.
Absolutely. I think, the gasification route for biochar that's the holy grail. Do that in a scalable solution, and you'll save the planet. Literally, that's how I see it. Pull the hydrogen out of the bio, lock up the carbon and repeat.
That's right.
And then make sure that where you're sourcing the biomass from is done in a net positive way. So the work that you're doing in Ansbig is, like really fundamental to laying that roadmap, as the document or potentially working on is laying that roadmap so that the whole industry scales in the right way, and then it's unstoppable. It's huge and official. If you cut corners or you just go for the low-hanging fruit, it'll come unstuck, and then everybody's tarred with that same brush, and you just push its headwinds.
That's right. Okay. All right. Well, look. Any other final comments before we go, Ignatius? Thank you for your time.
Only to thank you, Don, for indulging me in not being available tomorrow and doing this interview now. And thanks very much for all the time and the great work that you're doing. So,
All right. Well, thanks very much. And where can people email you for any further questions or inquiries?
Yeah, I've got lots of hats, but
Yeah.
get me through my Carbon X. So I think you'll probably have that in your, down the bottom of the screen or whatever.
Yeah. We'll
get me through Carbon X.
Okay. So we'll share your email, your Carbon X email in the chat with the audience. So okay. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, they can have follow-up questions there. So thanks very much again, Ignatius, and we'll catch up with you next time.
All right. Appreciate your time. Nice talking to you.
Okay. Thank you. You there? Okay. Hi. Can everyone hear me and see me? Not coming up on the screen yet, but yeah, we have lots of questions. But thanks very much to Ignatius. If you've got any questions for him, please send them to that email that we've put in the chat there. I'm going to go to Sam now for the next poll question.
Hi everyone. So you'll see one of our last questions. What part of this webinar did you find most valuable? So we have learning about voluntary carbon markets, learning about the economic benefits of biochar as a high value commodity, learning about how biochar works in the emissions reduction fund, or all three listed. So we would love to get some feedback from you all. And I will give you another 10 seconds just to get some more feedback from you all. Great to see that everyone has got some wonderful value from our three speakers today. Fabulous. Thank you so much for the feedback, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Sam. So we'll now go into our Q&A discussion. So, Sam, we've got quite a number of questions that have come through. So we'll get through as many as we can. We might have to extend this, I think, to 2:30. So running a little bit behind time. So Sam, I'll hand it over to you to run through some of the questions.
Great. So the first question we have, a couple for Tom. If a farmer were to produce biochar, closing the loop, how can that be quantified cheaply, assuming the biochar is made sustainably and made to the code?
The answer is by filling out our questionnaire, then we'll do it for you.
Nice and simple.
Yeah. Save you time for more questions. Yeah.
Very good. When is the VCS biochar methodology going to be finalized and published?
It should be any week now. It was supposed to be published in December, so we're already lagging behind here. We're expecting that to happen, in the next couple of weeks, early March latest.
Great.
But I mean, I guess the thing I can disclose here is, since we are co-authors of the methodology, we are, of course, aware of the comments that were made and where everything is heading. So that's one of the advantages of talking to us.
Great, thank you, Tom. And what is the carbon credit value cost per ton CO2?
So I interpret that in the sense that what would a VCS biochar credit sell for? In the presentation, I indicated that the current biochar credit prices are between $90 to $170 US. That's for Puro credits. We anticipate that the VCS credits will trade above that. So that gives you a bit of an idea. So I would feel similarly bullish to what Ignatius just pointed out. The market is short and there's great interest really in a biochar. And the beauty of this methodology really is that it has two different applications. So it's quite universal. Yeah, biochar is one of the easiest and most scalable and also cost-efficient ways of removing carbon at scale.
Great, thank you for that, Tom. I think this one is now moving to Melissa. So what kind of biochar projects would be eligible for sequestration as opposed to emissions avoidance? I'm not sure actually if that was for Tom or Melissa. Maybe you can both put your 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a go at it. Apologise for any background noise at the moment too. If you were to acquire biochar, purchase biochar, or even make some good quality biochar yourself, you can apply that to the soil, whether it be through the animal, straight biochar, or mixing with compost or fertilizers. What you need to do is generally through the Emission Reduction Fund or through Southpole or AgriProve or other companies, you baseline your soil carbon, and then you actually need to take off the amount of biochar you added. So in the trials that I showed, we added 200 kilos per hectare, but we increased the soil carbon by 4 tonnes. So it would be 4 tonne minus 200 kilos per hectare. So in that 1 year period, we increased by 4 tonnes. You take off the amount of biochar, and what's left is how much carbon you've increased. And then I showed that currently that particular project, you'd get a payback of about $700 per hectare just by applying biochar at 200 kilos per hectare. So that you need to apply for that through a broker. You can actually get the paperwork yourself through the Emission Reduction Fund, or you can go through a broker like Southpole or AgriProve or even Carbon Farmers of Australia.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Tom, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I mean, the methodology I presented really is a long-term sequestration methodology. There is an avoidance case also for biochar where this long-term removal cannot be demonstrated. And that would revolve around pointing to the fact that by producing a biochar, the amount of methane and other greenhouse gases through the decaying of the organic matter can be avoided. So yeah, that's a slightly different case, but it can be made as well.
Great, thank you, Tom. I think this one's for you, Melissa. Do you have any data on reduced methane emissions from biochar in feed?
There is research projects out there at the moment. There's one with CSIRO, Meat and Livestock Australia and University of Western Australia. There needs to be more. That is one of the things that ANSBIG is working on. So there's a number of projects in at the moment, but that data needs to be collected, because once we can prove that biochar reduces methane as a methodology, then hopefully down the track, those with beef cattle will be able to just say, look, I'm feeding 150 kilos per head per day. We know that that reduces methane by X, and then you can get a payback, but we're not there yet. So unfortunately, yeah, we still need to, as an industry, work on that. And there's projects in progress at the moment. So, you know, I'd say it's still going to be 2 or 3 years before that can actually occur for farmers to get the direct payback by feeding biochar from the government. But as I said, you know, there's still productivity benefits without a doubt, feeding it to your animal, and then the flow and soil health benefits as well, and pasture productivity benefits.
Maybe I can also jump in here. So we actually worked together with Melissa on that, and thanks, Melissa, for submitting some of these papers that were already published. So we had reviewed them, in total a dozen actually, and 8 papers did experiments either in vitro or vivo, and 4 were review papers. 60% of the vitro experiment papers have shown statistically significant results, 33% for vivo experiment papers. So almost all papers showed significantly statistically significant results. From the best ones are from Laos, the country of Laos, and the methane reduction rates were around 10 to 12, maximum 15%, I believe.
Great, thank you very much for adding to that one, Tom. Can you produce both carbon removal credits and emission avoidance credits from a single project, or would getting carbon removal credits discount you from accessing the other? That's a good question.
Well, there is no double dipping here or double counting. You need to opt for one methodology, and you cannot produce 2 credits from the same process. Is the easy answer. That's one of the 5 offsets integrity principles. Yeah.
I just want to have a go at that too. From my understanding is that, so for example, if you get your, so by producing the biochar, it's emission avoidance, right? And so you can get carbon credits from that emission avoidance. Now, if that biochar, that same biochar was to be applied to the soil through the emission reduction fund, the way to get around not double dipping is that you minus the amount of biochar that's added to the soil. So as I said, you know, in our trial that I showed as a case study, for example, we applied 200 kilos, but that biochar isn't photosynthesizing. That's the only way you can get extra carbon building. So that biochar, by adding that, improved the photosynthetic process, and there was additional carbon built by the photosynthesis. So but we didn't account for the biochar in the soil, but you can still get payback by building your soil carbon, because the biochar has increased that photosynthetic process. I hope that's not too complicated an answer, but I think, you know, so in a way you can still get your emission avoidance credits and use that biochar in the soil to stimulate your soil carbon being built.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what I didn't clearly point out also earlier. I mean, it's basically the difference between a direct credit for applying biochar to the soil, which is possible under the VCS method, and an indirect credit by benefiting soil organic carbon buildup through the addition of biochar to the soil, which is a permitted activity under the soil carbon method, and then waiting for the soil organic carbon to build up.
All right. Melissa, is it possible to get a link to the dairy study?
So I put my my website in the chat. There's a few extra studies I've got to put up there, but if you go to my website or just Google climate and agricultural support, you'll find there's a link there for biochar research, and there's the dairy study technical paper. There's a paper in press at the moment as well, which is publishing those results, and there's some other soil trial results, etc. there as well.
Okay. And does it also, I'm assuming in some of the stuff that you've got on there, you speak to how effective, there's a question here, how effective are lick blocks at getting the biochar into cattle, then through to the soil, and for dung beetles to bury? Do you have that sort of information?
Look, I haven't done any particular trials with the lick blocks, but I think it would be much harder to get that 150 grams per head per day into an animal with the lick blocks, because they'd have to lick a lot to get an equivalent of 150 grams. The way that I feed it, and a lot of people feed it to cattle and sheep and other grazing animals, is just by putting it out ad lib, but it's much tastier if it's mixed in with molasses or oil or something. So I often put it out ad lib with molasses, a tiny bit of molasses and oil, and then sometimes I'll mix it in with hay when I'm feeding out hay. So that to me is a better way of getting it in. You just make it up yourself. It's a lot cheaper that way as well than the lick blocks. Sure, the lick blocks work and still would have some benefit. Yeah. I'd just suggest that, you know, if we want that data, we need those that supply the blocks, which I believe the only one that does that at the moment is Olsen's, to potentially do those trials, and we'll have the data.
Great, thanks Melissa for that. A comment here, I think this might be for you, Tom. I understand from the first presenter that new Verra methodology puts the carbon credit in hand of the one who buries the biochar as opposed to the char producer. This is quite different from Puro or Carbon Future, etc., right? How will this affect the sale price of biochar created under Verra versus other methodologies?
Yeah, this is ultimately something that we see in many other methodologies and applications as well. If you think about the feed additive topic, for example, reducing methane via, for example, agalin as an essential oil-based feed additive, or the big topic now around seaweed, asparagopsis, right? So ultimately, you can only ensure that emissions are reduced when this administration or use at the application level is guaranteed. So how will that impact the market and the market price? I mean, there are a few ways of looking at this. I understand, of course, that the producers are very interested in this, and I mean, if they have a good product, then they should be able to sell it. The way that we set this up is either by working with producers who sell their product, for example, at a discount, or who provide some other sort of incentive, loyalty scheme, or cross-selling opportunity, maybe with their customer stock, in exchange for the customer signing the carbon rights over to the producer, and then having an aggregate project, which is something that we've done already on a few occasions. And the other one is by introducing a carbon project developer like Southpole to the end user against an introduction or referral fee, really. But to say that this is the first time that this is being done, that's not really the case. It's just from a standards perspective, the most efficient way of ensuring that emissions are permanently reduced.
Great, thanks for speaking to that, Tom. And just a couple more questions. I know we've gone over, so thanks everyone for your patience. Your price per ton is lower than the US and the EU markets. I'm just wondering if you can speak to that.
Well, maybe I can take this because we deal with so much carbon. If you mean, maybe you mean the ACCU price in Australia. So if the question is your price per ton, the ACCU price that was mentioned here was $50. That's true. It peaked at around 58, maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and is now at 51, 52. That is, of course, with a 300% increase from the beginning of last year, where it was trading at 18. It is significantly lower than what you can get with a VCS biochar credit, which I would predict would trade at 100 to 120, 140 maybe Australian dollars. And it is also much lower if you compare it to compliance markets such as Switzerland or Sweden, where the price per ton is regulated at around 180 Australian dollars a ton. So everybody talks and talks about the Australian carbon credit unit price hype and the increase, but keeping the international reference prices in mind, and also the need for decarbonizing, there's still a lot of room to grow, really. And that will also make other types of sequestration or removal at scale more economically viable down the road.
Great, thank you, Tom. I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to all of your questions. I will make sure that it goes to our presenters, and we will email through some answers for you. One of the last questions I wanted to ask, which has come through, is can we produce enough biochar in Australia?
I'll have a go. I mean, to produce enough biochar in Australia for, is that to mitigate the world's carbon dioxide? No, but it's a start, and there's been numbers done on that. But the thing is, what biochar can do as well, with this potential Kangaroo Island project, if we scale up to processing 5 tonnes of biomass in an hour, that's enough to power the whole of Kangaroo Island. So you can produce, while producing biochar, that's the other exciting thing, is that it creates heat energy. That heat energy can be used for multiple things. So no one's probably really done the numbers on how much biochar is needed to be produced for the world's carbon drawdown, but there is a really good book that talks about biochar as the answer to net zero by 2050. So I don't actually have those numbers in front of me, but suggest that people have a look at that book.
Tom, any comments?
I mean,
that one?
Again, I think Melissa, put it right. I would only say that we're starting from such a low base here at the moment that the potential and where it will stop, we cannot really fathom at this point. So it's best to get it underway and then see how far we can go. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you both so much. Don, if you want to come back on board, we can just wrap it up. We do have one last question for you all to answer, but I will let Don come on first, and then we can go to see what the answers are like. Yeah,
thanks very much. Yeah, so any questions that the presenters, Tom and Melissa, you can answer in the chat that haven't already been answered. You can type the answer in that Q&A panel. Otherwise, we'll cut and paste the questions, send them to you, and then we'll share the rest of those answers with the audience. So, look, thanks to all our presenters today for a wonderful session, and to Southpole for making it possible. So thank you, Tom. Next month's webinar, is the launch of our Biochar Industry 2030 roadmap to a new carbon economy. So we will have another excellent lineup where the authors of our roadmap will elaborate on the key objectives of this strategic plan to roll out biochar at significant scale by the end of this decade. Please join us as we seek 50% funding from the industry and 50% funding from the government for the production of the roadmap and hosting a 2-day summit mid-year. We will have an online crowdfund platform and an option for offline donations. Finally, February is ANSBIG's membership drive month at the beginning of each year, where our target is to increase membership by 20% on the average monthly uptake. If you join in February, you can receive a 1-month free trial to view the benefits without obligation to go ahead. We will also give you a free promotion of your business in our newsletter going out to all of our members. Also, for existing members of ANSBIG, if you refer a new member who continues on after the free trial, we will give you a free upgrade to the next level for the remaining of your membership. So on that note, Sam, if you could put up the final question, and until next time, best chance to you all.